ebusia for any other for high daily update mamu nyina kwa baba channel so say nen dey kana hwa na so tan hwa na so subscribe ya need new book kwan so no obe subscribe my sin be dan den all the latest update bi be biam so so be ko so akep na so ayden ohun ne me ko so Ghana fa nya na so ohun de obeye yen somebody yen go straight to majority so ene and I just say a budget no can for a customer a parliament already budget no and near me basic 2024 say be friendly paid mass for my taxes said then washa say then e can want some no and bro can kind more na all say is a dollar rate no any Ghana citizen say no when they say a cedi ni appreciate it just say cedi na ho den cost na be the MPs from the both NPP MPs so NDC MPs be here omunyina teams hey eja baby adruno enye wo NPP wo NDC because economy mo ayen no obi feel yen so kotade ye be busa wo NPP ana so NDC ni one cedi na de to ma obi 2 cedi na de to ma obi a ti se de ade ni city bia no obi a no kra e be ka se yo no kra so obi a be je se enye de bia che se parliament ho a hie pa ka me ho ni nkote bra na kenu frianta reading the budget any update kakra ba a che se ye be use no 2024 no yenkote.
Mr. Speaker, macroeconomic imbalances are also improving, evidenced by falling inflation in most parts of the region. A slowdown in reform efforts, a rise in political insecurity within the region, and external downside risks, including China slowing down, could undermine growth. Mr. Speaker, please permit me to present the macro performance of the first 3 quarters of 2023 within the context of the targets that were set in the 2023 Mid-Year Fiscal Policy Review. Before I proceed, it's important that I restate the targets we set in the 2023 Mid-Year Fiscal Review. These include overall GDP growth of 1.5%, non-oil real GDP rate of 1.5%, end period inflation of 31.3%, overall balance commitment of overall primary balance commitment basis of -5% of GDP, and gross international reserves excluding oil funds, encumbered assets and pledged assets sufficient to cover at least 0.8 months of imports of goods and services by end 2023. Mr. Speaker, provisional macroeconomic data on the performance of the economy for the periods Q1 to Q3 2023 demonstrated government's relentless commitment to keep us on the high road to recovery. The IMF rightly described Ghana's recent macroeconomic performance in the first review as compelling performance, and I quote, "Honorable members, may we wish to refer to the IMF's press release numbers PR23/339 and dated 6 October 2023 for this update. As I indicated during the 2023 Mid-Year Fiscal Policy Review, the prompt deployment of strong fiscal and monetary policy measures largely accounts for the continued macroeconomic stability and economic recovery. Growth in 2023 has been more resilient than earlier expected. Inflation has been on the decline faster than expected. The fiscal and external balances have improved, and the exchange rate has broadly stabilized. Mr. Speaker, government introduced the gold for oil policy in 2022. The policy, which leverages the Bank of Ghana's domestic gold purchase program, was intended to provide foreign exchange financing for the importation of petroleum products and help reduce demand for US dollars from the bulk import distribution and export companies who would have otherwise gone to the market to source forex for the importation of petroleum products. Since then, Mr. Speaker, under the Gold for Reserves program, the Bank of Ghana has purchased a total of 17.89 tons, 1.14 billion US dollars of gold to boost its gold reserves. In addition, under the G40 program, Gold for Oil program, 23 cargoes, circa 800,000 metric tons, of gasoline and gas oil, equivalent to 30% of national consumption, have so far been imported. The G40 program has significantly contributed to the stabilization of the Cedi-Dollar exchange rate, 17 cedis to the dollar in November 2022 to 12 cedis to the dollar in November 2023, leading to a reduction in the export price of diesel from 23 cedis per litre, Mr. Speaker, to 12 cedis per litre today. Mr. Speaker, I'll now update the House on the performance of our macroeconomic indicators. Real GDP growth averaged 3.2% in the first half of 2023, compared to 2.9% in the same period in 2022, signaling a strong rebound. Robust growth in services averaged 6.3%, and agriculture also averaged 6.2%, sectors were the key drivers. It is instructive to note that the average growth of 3.2% for the first two quarters of 2023 is higher than 2023 revised growth target of 1.5%. Price developments indicate that inflation is on a declining path in response to ongoing fiscal consolidation, appropriate tightening of monetary policy, and relative stability in the exchange rate. Headline inflation declined by over 16 percentage points from 34.1% in December 2022 to 38.1% in September 2023 and 35.2% as of October 2023. The cedi has stabilized against the US dollar since early 2023. With a year-to-date, Mr. Speaker, a year-to-date cumulative depreciation of 25% compared to 54% in 2022. Specifically, Mr. Speaker, on cumulative basis, compared to, Mr. Speaker, 53.9% over the same period in 2022. The stability of the cedi largely reflects the positive impact from the restoration of economic activity, including robust domestic gold purchase program, reduced speculative forex demand as market confidence rebounds. Gross international reserves as of September 2023 stood at 5 billion 2.3 months import cover, compared to 6.3 billion 2.7 months import cover at the end of 2022, but expecting only a 0.8 months at mid-year when we stood here to pronounce where we were heading to. We are yet, Mr. Speaker, to reflect IMF, World Bank, and Cocoa Bank indications of approximately $2 billion by year-end. The current account turned positive at 1.1% of GDP at end June 2023, a monumental turnaround from the deficit of 2.1% of GDP at end December 2022. Likewise, the trade balance improved to a surplus of 2.6% of GDP as of end August 2023 from 0.7% of GDP surplus at end December 2022. Though interest rates moderated from December 2022 to the first quarter 2023, they picked up again as T-bills remain the key debt instrument in the debt market after the DDEP. For instance, the 91-day Treasury declined from 35.5% in December 2022 to 18.5% in March 2023, but increased to 29.8% as of Monday, 13th November 2023. The overall budget deficit on commitment basis as of end August 2023 was a deficit of 3.0% of GDP, outperforming the targeted deficit of 4.6% of GDP. The outturn largely reflects improvements in revenue mobilization and slower execution of expenditure. The corresponding primary balance on commitment basis was a deficit of 0.7% of GDP, also outperforming the target surplus of 0.9% of GDP. Public debt accumulation has slowed down significantly as government continued to consolidate its public finances and also reflects the impact of the domestic debt exchange program and the ongoing external debt restructuring. Total public debt has declined from 73.1% of GDP at the end of 2022, Mr. Speaker, to 66.4% of GDP as at September 2023. The completion of external debt restructuring is expected to further improve Ghana's debt to GDP ratio. Mr. Speaker, the 2023 fiscal framework was revised during the 2023 mid-year fiscal policy review to reflect updated macro-fiscal developments and align with the fiscal adjustment path under the IMF-supported PCPEC path. Mr. Speaker, the fiscal performance for the first 8 months of the year using provisional data shows significant progress towards a stronger fiscal consolidation. More specifically, Mr. Speaker, total revenue and grants was 71.9 billion, 9.3% of GDP, 2.8% lower than the program target of 82.2 billion, 9.6% of GDP. Total expenditure commitment was 104.6 billion, 12.2% of GDP, 14.1% lower than the target of 121.8 billion, 14.2% of GDP. Primary expenditure commitment was 84.7 billion, 9.9% of GDP, 6.0% lower than the target of 90.1 billion, 10.5% of GDP. Primary balance commitment was a deficit of 5.5 billion or 0.7% of GDP compared to the target deficit of 7.9 billion, 0.9% of GDP. Overall fiscal balance commitment was a deficit of 25.4 billion, 3% of GDP compared to target deficit of 39.6 billion or 4.6% of GDP. And overall fiscal balance cash was a deficit of 26.1 billion, 3% of GDP compared to the target deficit of 44.6 billion, 5.2% of GDP. Mr. Speaker, we are doing much better than predicted.
Yes, Ofori Atta Kasa Papa Kasa Penny. Also, Mr. Speaker, we are doing much better than our previous actions. Just on one Kasano or Bono Basso or Noan Casano, you ya dear Ghana for another because we are dear. You know, betches or we are dear. So no one no say Boba Bonjinisu, Bobon Mombona Basu, or no bonnet trumpet, and as or no bono a bang and on one say air sacao. Sabin or cyber to your fair taxes such as say on be implemented any VAT on better one as someone to sono or be changing me a year budget BCD. I was saying in a 12 was in a day. Yet near see a fire one you would be expenses be was a catana. I was say expenses so more I say the near fire one you say. About almost asa to about more a budget because ye dira 2024 into any man kui and answers again a hobby. There's no this better now a man crofui about every year be no barbecue commanding and cool crown on one cassa air bonnet don't do as account. So we say for young trust in air taxes and just all the better bonds.
Mr. Speaker, based on the overall macroeconomic objectives and the medium-term targets, the following macroeconomic targets are set for the 2024 fiscal year. Overall real GDP growth of at least 2.8%, non-oil real GDP growth of at least 2.1%, end period inflation rate of 5.0%, primary balance on commitment basis of a surplus of 0.5% of GDP, and gross international reserve to cover not less than 3 months of imports. Mr. Speaker, the 2024 and medium-term fiscal framework has been prepared in line with the objectives and policy priorities of a 3-year IMF-supported PCPEC program. The primary balance on commitment basis is the fiscal anchor we are using to assess our fiscal effort. Over the medium term, we plan to improve the primary balance commitment from a deficit of 4.3% of GDP in 2022 to deficit of 0.5% of GDP in 2023, a huge 3.9% adjustment. The primary balance is expected to improve further to a surplus at 0.5% of GDP in 2024 and 1.5% of GDP from 2025 onwards. Mr. Speaker, total revenue and grants is projected at 176.4 billion Ghana cedis, 16.8% of GDP as we move towards our 18% target. And this is underpinned by permanent revenue measures, largely tax revenue measures amounting to 0.9% of GDP. Mr. Speaker, total expenditure is projected at 226.7 billion, 21.6% of GDP. This projection reflects a reduction of 6.1 percentage points of GDP in total expenditure commitment basis compared to the outturn in 2022. This large decrease comes from the combination of fiscal consolidation efforts of 4.9 percentage points of GDP, reflecting an adjustment in revenue by 1.1 percentage point and primary expenditure by 3.9 percentage points of GDP. The potential interest rate savings from the ongoing external debt operation will further bolster public finance sustainability. Mr. Speaker, based on the estimates for total revenue and grants and total expenditure, including arrears clearance, the overall budget balance will be financed in a fiscal deficit of 61.9 billion, equivalent to 5.9% of GDP. The corresponding primary balance is a deficit of 5.9 billion, equivalent to 0.6% of GDP. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Finance, I think through the Ghana Revenue Authority, as per Section 4 of the Ghana Revenue Authority Act 2009, introduced the Property Rate Reform Project. The objective was to develop a unified common platform capable of billing, collecting, and reporting property rates nationwide. Mr. Speaker, the initiative has encountered some challenges that's making it difficult for the relevant bodies, including the Metropolitan, Municipal, and District Assemblies, to have access to their share of the property rate collection on time. Mr. Speaker, to address these challenges, government is reviewing the overall structures and processes to determine the optimal way forward. In the interim, districts will resume collection as these challenges are resolved. Mr. Speaker, tax reliefs. Our approach to tax policy since 2017 was to give significant relief to the private sector until expenditure pressures from 2020 required a more aggressive approach. It is important to note that in the short term, fiscal sustainability requires that we improve our tax ratios significantly, otherwise our long-term competitiveness will be eroded. As we all know, our country's 13% tax to GDP ratio is far below our peers. Our target is 18 to 20%, and we are on course for 16%, hoping to be achieved this year. In that regard, it is difficult to implement all the structural reforms and tax reliefs needed to immediately lower and or eliminate certain tax handles. However, I assure this august House that we have heard we believe in lower taxes as a government for industry, and we are working at this aggressively with the GRA and to be cemented with the Standing Committee of the Mutual Prosperity Dialogue. Mr. Speaker, further to the above, the following reliefs have been prioritized for implementation. To extend, Mr. Speaker, the zero rate of VAT on locally manufactured African prints for 2 more years. Mr. Speaker, to waive import duties on import of electric vehicles for public transportation for a period of 8 years. Mr. Speaker, to waive import duties on semi-knocked down and completely knocked down electric vehicles imported by registered EV assembly companies in Ghana for a period of 8 years. Mr. Speaker, to extend zero rate of VAT on locally assembled vehicles for 2 more years. Mr. Speaker, to zero rate VAT on locally produced sanitary pads. Mr. Speaker,
Tebusan for when budget kakra say yedi can travel say stay tuned na say kakra kakra ni bi travel na no so ho de ekobia edefa budget na no nti we ye taxes ene eye dollar and cedi eye rate no so na say MPs for no asem na o can say eye cedi ni show some appreciation na say ehun ye den kakra kakra nya no kre sisi no okona kope dollar o the cedis kope dollar ade achese ne board yin pa enya asem keto so we can over Atta and onya abotre ready budget enyema ye besi of 2024 no eno no wo kama twen yesade for Fɪrè shema ansane be kono sese wa won subscribe you know need no book and so be subscribe me sene be adande nyina no all the latest updates be be bia no oso sabe ko so akemina so ide wo hu ne me ko so Ghana for nyina bese be sem be pi aha ne pese de musi Akroma